Despite the Blackhawks losing their fifth consecutive game, Frank Nazar continued to flash his upside at the NHL level. I'll talk about all of that on today's episode. Plus, John Wiedeman and Troy Murray receiving contract extensions in the future of the Chicago Blackhawks broadcast.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2. And make sure to also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account as well, if you haven't done so already, at Talkin' Hockey. So that way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And a quick reminder to everyone watching this on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you're a regular audio listener of the podcast, make sure to be constantly downloading all of those latest bad boys. You can also rate and review the show if you want to as well. And I also got to let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off to your first purchase at a sporting event, concert, or theater event near you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Another game, another loss for our Chicago Blackhawks. They've now dropped 6 of 7 here in the month of April. Certainly not wrapping things up the way that I personally think the front office would have liked to. Yes, the losing has helped them now secure the second best odds to landing the number 1 overall selection in the 2024 NHL draft, aka Macklin Celebrini. We know the Hawks have a 13.5% chance at landing that number 1 pick. You can go and check out my episode from yesterday for my full thoughts on that matter. But yeah, after a really good month of March from the Blackhawks, their best month of the entire season, you know, some guys starting to get healthier. Andreas Athanasiou returns to the lineup. You get Lucas Reichel back up in the NHL, starting to play better. Defensively, they've gotten a little bit healthier. Connor Murphy, they probably assumed he was going to be back sooner, but, you know, better late than never for his case. But, you know, with all that happening, and again, led by a really successful month of March, I feel like the Blackhawks were really wanting to finish the season on a high note to give them some momentum going into this offseason and hopefully leading to better hockey out of them for a majority of next year. It doesn't sound like they're going to be doing a whole heck of a lot of spending in free agency this year, at least pertaining to the big fish on the market. But I do think, you know, it's starting to get that to that time where, you know, they want to see improvements out of this team. They want to see Luke Richardson be able to coach a team that can go out there and win games at a much more successful clip than the last couple of seasons. So for the Blackhawks to kind of be ending the way that they are right here, right now is certainly a little bit disappointing. They've now scored just 6 goals during their current 5-game losing skid, but fortunately only one more painful game to watch here in the lowest scoring season offensively in Chicago Blackhawks franchise history, unless they go and score 14 on Thursday night against the Los Angeles Kings, which, funny enough, is actually a pretty meaningful game for Los Angeles, because after the Blackhawks lost to Vegas last night, the Golden Knights leaped the Kings in the standings and now hold the third and final playoff spot in the Pacific Division. Whoever finishes out of that third and final playoff spot will hold the second wild card position along with the Nashville Predators. So that's really the only playoff race still going on here in the Western Conference as we're getting down to the nitty gritty. But yeah, Thursday night going to be a meaningful game for Los Angeles. They're going to have to beat the Blackhawks and hope the Golden Knights lose to the Anaheim Ducks, which doesn't seem very likely, in order to get that third and final playoff spot, or else, like I said, they will have the last wild card spot below the Nashville Predators and will play the top seed in the opening round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But speaking of meaningful games, last night, obviously, as I just outlined, was a meaningful one for the Vegas Golden Knights as well. And despite it being a meaningful game for them, I thought the Blackhawks, especially considering how things have been going for them over the last week, I thought they actually stood their ground pretty well, better than expected. and gave the Golden Knights a good fight. They certainly didn't get pummeled out there, and just made it a close game all the way from start to finish, closer than I anticipated it being, and certainly than the odds makers did as well, because they had the Blackhawks at, I think, plus 330 underdogs, and the Golden Knights listed as minus 425 favorites. So the Blackhawks gave all the Vegas Golden Knights backers in this one a little bit of a scare. It was nothing after the opening 20 minutes. Vegas did manage to take a 1-0 lead late in the second period as Braden McNabb capitalized on Peter Mrazek not being able to get eyes on a loose puck. He jumps down low into the play and corrals a rebound and puts it into the yawning cage. And then early on in the third, Vegas was able to double their lead as Michael Amadio drove down the right wing with some speed and absolutely housed a shot over the glove of Peter Mrazek. The Blackhawks, as I said, put up a fight until the very end as Jason Dickinson scored a goal with just under 4 minutes to play to make this a 2-1 game, but Golden Knights would go on to add the empty netter and take this one by a final score of 3-1. But the main takeaway from this game, as I've talked about, the results aren't meaningful at this point in time for the Blackhawks. Win or lose, they're already secured into that 31st position in the NHL standings. The main takeaway from this game absolutely has to be Frank Nazar continuing to look awesome. You go and look at the box score, nothing will really stand out. He only had one shot on goal and was -3 in 15 minutes and 19 seconds of ice time, won 36% of his faceoffs while centering the Blackhawks third line in between Jason Dickinson and Joey Anderson. But just the way that he looked and the way that he plays, the upside was clearly there. You could see the potential that this kid possesses, and oh yeah, he doesn't turn 21 years of age until next January. So what he's been able to do in his first 2 NHL games, I think you absolutely have to give him an A+. And you can see why I've been so excited about his future since the Blackhawks selected him 13th overall in the 2022 NHL draft. I know it was a little bit tough at the time to say goodbye to Kirby Dach, but this deal really looks like it could do wonders for the Blackhawks. Not only did they get Frank Nazar, but they also got the draft pick that led to Gavin Hayes, who was another member of the United States gold medal winning World Junior Championship team this past winter, and also has been looking really good in his last couple of years up in the OHL. A 40-goal score 2 years ago and potted 37 goals this year. I'll actually be talking more about Gavin here in segment 3, so make sure to stay tuned until that point of the episode. But yeah, you can just tell the high octane pace that Frank Nazar is able to play with. The speed is super evident. The offensive abilities, the playmaking. I thought it was awesome, the clip of him trying to make that like backhanded spinorama cross ice pass in the offensive zone. Yeah, it didn't work, but you can just see the creativity is prevalent, and it almost reminds you a little bit of Connor Bedard in the way he tries to maneuver out there. And Hadi Kalakash, NHL prospects guy for the Locked On Podcast Network that I had on the show, said he really believes Frank Nazar and Connor Bedard could be a very good duo for the Blackhawks for a long, long time. And yeah, I think you can see why he feels that way based on what we've seen out of Nazar in his first 2 NHL games thus far. He was one of the better players on the ice for the Blackhawks. Again, only 20 years of age. So got to be excited about the future for Frank the Tank based on what we've seen thus far. Hopefully he has another really strong showing on Thursday to wrap up this season against the Los Angeles Kings. And one thing that's also kind of become clear here real quick as I tie a bow on this first segment, it's clear the type of players that Kyle Davidson has tried to draft since he's taken over as the Blackhawks general manager, right? Guys who can play that high octane pace and have good skill along with it, good playmaking abilities, and can impact the game all over the ice because of it. You can see it with Frank Nazar, can obviously see it with Connor Bedard. But also Oliver Moore is someone who has incredible speed. Even Kevin Korchinski as a defenseman, I would put him in that category with his offensive skill and the way that he can skate. I think Sam Rinzel is, obviously a much bigger defenseman and plays on the right-hand side, but I think he fits kind of that mold as well. Roman Kanserov, who I talked about, is doing wonders in the KHL playoffs to help Metalurg reach the Gagarin Cup. He fits that kind of mold as well. Paul Ludwinski is similar. Nick Lardis, Gavin Hayes, who I just referenced as well. There's a type here that Kyle Davidson has clearly gone after in these last couple of NHL drafts. Really curious, though, to see if he's going to keep up with that or if he's going to try to add some more power forward type of players in this year's draft, because it seems like the Blackhawks kind of have the center position solidified in their prospect pool. Defensemen, they have a plethora of those as well. I think they need to add someone on the right-hand side, but I think they also need to add some bigger power forward type of mold bodies into their prospect pool as well. So really interested to see what kind of theme of players Kyle Davidson is going to go with in the 2024 NHL draft. All right, there are my thoughts on Frank Nazar continuing to look sharp despite the Blackhawks losing their 5th consecutive game last night. Coming up in just a moment, I will talk about some updates coming to the Blackhawks broadcast booth in the future. But first, I got to talk to you all about Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to the next big game that you want to attend. And Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Plus, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets, to the first pitch. And with last minute deals that are killer, all-in prices, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And I personally have used Game Time for probably around 10 years at this point, since I was a little kid going to watch Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews down at the United Center, and still to this day, whenever I want to go and see the Cubbies play at Wrigley Field, or even if I'm traveling in another city and want to go and see a comedy show with one of my friends or want to go and check out a concert, I always make sure to check out Game Time, because it's the fastest way to purchase your tickets, the easiest way for you to purchase your tickets, and the cheapest way for you to purchase your tickets as well. Plus, I love how they have views from every seat in the venue, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Plus, last minute tickets, flash deals, and zone deals, so it's easy to find and buy MLB tickets now that baseball season is about to take over. I highly recommend you all go and check out the Game Time app. Go and download it right now, create an account, and when you do, also use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. Yes, you heard me right. You can get $20 off on a trip to Wrigley Field this year. Just download the Game Time app. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get that $20 off coupon. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Game Time. Segment 2, one thing that went down a couple of days ago that I haven't been able to share my reaction on here on the show yet is the news regarding the Blackhawks radio broadcast in the future. And we've kind of seen this new era of the Blackhawks front office, led by Jamie Faulkner, of course, on the business side of things, kind of tinker with the broadcast the last year and a half or so. And we also saw, once we learned that Pat Foley was not going to be coming back, that they were going through a plethora of different tryout options on the broadcast to kind of give fans some experience with certain new faces and be able to get the feedback on that and then further evaluate all of those options. We have also seen them go to the simulcast option this year, which is when they go and put the TV broadcast on the radio. We've also seen the other broadcast options hosted by Charlie Roumeliotis and John Scott, where they have a bunch of different guests come on that show. The Blackhawks have done a bunch of different things regarding the broadcast. And, you know, there is kind of a changing of the guard on this front in professional sports. There's a new era of broadcasting going on, especially with cable becoming less and less popular in households all across the world because streaming services are really taking over. It's become a time where a lot of these professional sports franchises are having to evaluate their options and move in a different direction or see what's going to be the next best thing moving forward with this age of technology and all of these developments. And they've messed with a lot of different things, have the Blackhawks, but I think they've gotten this one right. I'm very happy to announce, I guess I'm not announcing it, it's been out there for a couple of days, but very happy to hear and talk about on the show that John Wiedeman and Troy Murray are going to remain part of the radio broadcast for the next 3 years. The Blackhawks have signed both of them to extensions, and I think it's obviously well-deserved. You know, Blackhawks fans feel like they've gotten a connection with this duo over, you know, the last 20 years. Both of them have been on the job together since the 2006-2007 season. I think they do the great job. I truly believe that the Blackhawks have one of the best radio calls in all of professional sports, not just hockey. I mean, John Wiedeman is an awesome play-by-play guy. Troy Murray is awesome alongside him as well. And by bringing them back, not only are they going to remain on WGN for the next 3 years, so everyone out there who's a frequent listener of 7 to 720 when the Blackhawks are on the air, going to be very happy that they're still going to be on WGN for the next 3 years. And this also, of course, allows Wiedeman to fill in for Chris Vosters from time to time, which we've seen happen this season. And then when Darren Pang has his national TV duties, it allows for Troy Murray to go jump on in with Chris as well. So I think this was kind of a no-brainer for the Blackhawks. I know things are changing. I know it's kind of a new era of broadcast and sports, but it would have been really sad after seeing Pat Foley and Eddie Olczyk, that dynamic duo that was up in the broadcast TV booth for so long. It was tough to watch them go. It would be another real tough pill to swallow if John Wiedeman and Troy Murray weren't brought back. So glad to hear and glad to see they're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But I also want to talk about the future of the Blackhawks TV broadcast for just a second, because the current deal with NBC Sports Chicago is set to expire this upcoming October. And I saw in a post or in an article by Jeff Agrest from the Chicago Sun-Times that while there is an option for NBC Sports Chicago to have a 6-month extension for the Blackhawks starting in October, which would lead all the way up until the beginning of baseball season in April, that could be a possibility, or Stadium is just going to take over the Blackhawks TV rights immediately following that point. But the bigger story to me here is, regardless of the Blackhawks changing networks and all that stuff, we don't have all of the details yet, but it's obviously going to be impactful for all of us fans. But what I'm really curious about is, I read in that column by Jeff Agrest, he said that if this deal does happen with Stadium, staff members for NBC Sports Chicago figure to be affected by the move. And you got to wonder how that's going to impact, Chris Vosters' future, Darren Pang, Pat Boyle, everyone who works for NBC Sports Chicago. Charlie Roumeliotis, a recurring guest here on the show. And it would be really sad if Darren Pang, after coming on this season and just being a wonder on the Blackhawks broadcast, I think he has been an excellent addition. He knows the game really well. He's funny. He knows how to intermix that and still call a very good game of hockey. He's lighthearted. He's relatable. Like I said, very comedic. I've loved everything about Darren Pang in the broadcast. I could give rave reviews on and on and on about the job that I think he's done personally. Chris Vosters, though, is the one I'm really curious about in terms of his future, because it does seem like he just hasn't had that connection to Blackhawks fans since he's taken over for Pat Foley. And honestly, at this point, I don't think it's about him being the one to take over for Pat. I know that was obviously always going to be some big shoes for him to fill, but I don't think that's the problem here. I don't think the problem is that he's not Pat Foley, because we knew no one was going to be Pat Foley. But I don't know. I just personally can't really buy into Vosters. I still don't love the goal call whenever the Blackhawks score a goal. It doesn't feel like, and I apologize, I like Chris. I think he's a good guy. It just doesn't feel like the call of an Original Six franchise. And I think Chris is a really good commentator. I think he's good at his job, clearly. I just don't know if it's here with the Chicago Blackhawks. And I kind of do wonder if the front office is feeling the same way. I know going into this past offseason, heading into this season, Jamie Faulkner said there were no thoughts whatsoever about going in a different direction with Chris Vosters. Well, now I don't know if the Blackhawks are ultimately going to have the say over that if Stadium does take over. So I'm just kind of curious what's going to happen there with the Blackhawks broadcast booth. But go and comment down below as to your feelings about Chris Vosters since he's taken over as the Blackhawks play-by-play announcer for Pat Foley. I'm genuinely curious to see what all of you fans out there feel and think about Chris Vosters, because like I said, I don't think he's bad at his job. He's good at his job. I just don't know if he's necessarily a fit for the Blackhawks long term. And I feel like it was okay during these rebuilding years to give a guy like him a tryout and to kind of get his feet wet into hockey. I just don't think he's going to be the broadcaster, in my opinion, for the Blackhawks when they start to ramp things back up and start to become a competitive team once again. That's just my 2 cents. But again, go and let me know how you feel about that matter in the comment section down below. But there are my thoughts on the Blackhawks broadcast situation at the moment. Coming up in a moment here before I wrap things up, I still got to talk about some updates on all the Blackhawks prospects taking part in the OHL and QMJHL playoffs. But first, I need to talk to you all. That is the wrong one. I apologize. No free advertising on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. I need to talk to you all first about Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime. Scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure that you or your team is going to be able to pull together and come away with the win. But that's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game. Pull up some bank heists and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go, of course, lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches in the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, and with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. And there's so much that you can do. You can play on smashing and countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by destroying their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or on Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, to everyone out there who's watching this on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff really does help me grow the show. And if you're listening to the audio version of this right here, right now, go and leave a 5-star rating. That always puts a big smile on my face. You can rate and review the show as well, preferably with a good review. Those are also always great. And I also got to let you know to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7 with all of the latest updates regarding every league, plus our national shows covering every single sport. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, segment 3. Before I wrap things up, I know I talked yesterday about Paul Ludwinski, Nick Lardis, and Martin Misiak all joining the Rockford Ice Hogs here for the end of the season. Paul Ludwinski is going to be the only one of those three, I believe, that's going to get game action. But I also wanted to be sure to talk about all of the Blackhawks prospects who are still alive in the OHL playoffs, and Samuel Savoie in the QMJHL playoffs as well, and also talk about how the season came to a close for Ludwinski, Lardis, and Misiak. First, for Misiak, he and the Erie Otters were knocked out of the first round by the Kitchener Rangers, losing that series 4-2. Martin Misiak missed a couple of games. Oddly enough, they never disclosed as to whether that was due to injury or due to illness or what the circumstances were there, but I kind of just figured that it was because of an injury, because he's been one of their more productive players all year long, been a top 6, top 9 guy. Figure it was probably something to do to injury, but in those 4 games of action, Misiak tallied 1 goal and 1 assist and has now signed an ATL with the Ice Hogs to kind of get a little bit of a glimpse of what it's like at the pro level. So is Nick Lardis. He is on that same ATO deal as Misiak. He did ink his entry-level contract with the Blackhawks, though, which is a promising sign for his future. Not that it was ever in doubt or in jeopardy or anything, but unfortunately, despite Nick Lardis returning for Game 1 of Brantford's opening round series against the Ottawa 67s, the Bulldogs were swept by, or actually, they were not swept. They lost in 6 games to Ottawa in that opening round series, losing 4-2. Lardis did some good work, though, in his return in in 6 games of action, tallying 4 goals and 4 assists for 8 points. Paul Ludwinski and the Kingston Frontenacs were the 7 seed. They took on the 2-seeded North Bay Battalion in the first round. They lost in 5 games, dropping that series 4-1. Ludwinski, though, as he had been all season long, remained consistent on the offensive side of things, above a point per game in his 5 games of action, tallied 6 points, 2 goals, and 4 assists. As far as the Blackhawks prospects that are still alive in the CHL playoffs, we'll start with Gavin Hayes in the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds after he was dealt there from the Flint Firebirds at the midway point of this season. They bested the Guelph Storm in the opening round of the OHL playoffs, swept them 4-0, but they are currently down 2-1 in the Western Conference second round to the Saginaw Spirit. Down 2-1 through 3 games so far in 7 playoff contests. Gavin Hayes has tallied 4 goals and 6 assists for 10 points. He had 76 points in 55 games during the regular season, 37 goals and 39 assists. I assume he is also going to make the leap to professional hockey following the conclusion of the season. Had Sue already been eliminated, I feel like he'd probably be in the same spot as Paul Ludwinski, considering this time last year he signed an ATO like Lardis and like Misiak are doing right now to get a little bit of experience at the AHL level. So I do fully expect Hayes to make the jump to Rockford next year and be in the AHL lineup for the Hogs to kick off the season. Still only 20 years old, by the way, as Gavin Hayes doesn't turn 21 until May. Alex Ferrand and the Sudbury Wolves are still alive in the OHL playoffs as well. They beat the Mississauga Steelheads 4-1 in their opening round series, but are currently down 3-0 to the North Bay Battalion, the team that bested Paul Ludwinski's Kingston Frontenacs in the opening round 3-0. So Sudbury is going to have to go on one heck of a run to avoid elimination in the second round. They're going to need Dalibor Dvorsky and Quentin Musty to go absolutely bananas as far as what Alex Ferrand has put up offensively. 3 points in 8 games, 1 goal and 2 assists. Honestly, pretty good for what he contributed offensively in the regular season when it was the Dalibor Dvorsky and Quentin Musty show. 30 points in 68 regular season games this year for Ferrand. Honestly, a little bit disappointing, down production-wise in terms of what he put up the year prior. Was 17 goals and 13 assists in those 68 games. I likely expect him to go back to Sudbury as well to further develop, and he's still a young 19-year-old kid. He's actually not going to turn 20 years old until next January. And then we have the Blackhawks' lone prospect in the QMJHL playoffs. That is Samuel Savoie and his Rouyn-Noranda Huskies, who he was dealt to prior to returning from injury after suffering that fractured tibia. That, a tough injury for him in the preseason that cost him the majority of his year this season, but was able to return for 21 games after that injury and did rather nicely offensively, 22 points in that time. And offensively, Savoie had taken a really big leap the year prior, being a near point per game guy for the Gatineau Olympiques. So nice to see him return and keep up that productivity. 10 goals and 12 assists for those 22 points in 21 games out of Savoie. And how about this out of Sammy? Restraining himself a little bit, showing a bit of discipline for the first time in his career. Only 23 penalty minutes in those 21 games. And I want to say he got ejected in a game, like maybe his second or third game back. So like he's really been on his best behavior as of late. And while you do still want Samuel Savoie to play with that edge, that's what makes him special. And that grit and determination and the get under your skin ability, whatever you want to call it, is I think what gives him a good shot at being a role player for the Blackhawks one day down the road. You don't want him to lose that, but you also don't want him to be kind of like an Andrew Shaw guy who could lose his cool. Things could get out of hand in a second, had a temper and would take bad penalties from time to time. You don't want Savoie to be coming too comfortable with taking those frequently. So to see him only at 23 penalty minutes really stood out to me, considering I think he had 90 for the Gatineau Olympiques or something along those lines last year. So nice to see those numbers down a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see if Sammy does make the leap to professional hockey. I feel like the Blackhawks probably want to get their hands on him. And I think it would be awesome to have him in Rockford next year. I mean, Ludwinski, Gavin Hayes, obviously. You're going to have maybe Nolan Allen, Ethan Del Mastro could still be there. I honestly wouldn't be shocked to see Wyatt Kaiser there, or even maybe Kevin Korchinski, Frank Nazar. Like, Rockford could be really, really interesting next year. So I would love to see Samuel Savoie there, but at the same point in time, obviously the Blackhawks wanted him to have a full year's worth of junior hockey had he not gotten hurt in the preseason. So I do wonder if they want to allow him to have that by returning to the Roy Noranda Huskies or maybe another QMJHL team if he gets dealt next year. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that situation, but he's another young guy that's not going to turn 21 until next March. So even if he does wait another year, he's still only going to be 22 at that point in time. And it's not going to be any issue one way or another, even if he does take that extra year. So we'll definitely be on the Samuel Savoie watch here, but that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. And that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. And as always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman 2, and make sure to subscribe